Good morning. It's good to see all of you here this morning. Good to have you with us in our Bible class period. We are in the book of Revelation, and we're going to get into Revelation chapter 13 this morning. We've been studying through the book of Revelation, and we've been noticing some different things that are there. And the book is a complicated book. It's a complex book. It's a book of symbols and pictures and visions that John has given. And what we need to gather from that is the overall picture, the overall theme of what's going on here, and that is for the Christians to stick with Christ, to stick with Christianity, and that they will be victorious in the end, even though it may look bad that the Roman Empire is going to persecute them for some time. And the Holy Spirit, or the revelation itself, it comes from God the Father through Jesus Christ to his angel and to John, that he signified these things to John, or signified, if you want to southern it, I suppose. You can say he signified, right? He showed signs to him, these visions that he has, things that are going to happen. And he says, tells him in Revelation chapter 1, I believe it's verse 19, that he is to write the things which he has seen, past tense, the things which are, present tense. And you've got those letters to the seven churches of Asia that are things which are, present tense at the time that John is writing, and the things which are to come, which means that there are things in the future that John is going to write about, things that are in their future that John is going to write about. Now, much of what is written in the book of Revelation was in their future, but it's in our past. Things that have already taken place. And we get that from the very beginning of the book, where he says these things are shortly going to take place, for the time is at hand. And then at the end of the book in Revelation 22, John is told that the time is at hand and to not seal up the writings of this book, for these things are going to come to pass. And so it's dealing with the persecution that the Christians are going to face under the Roman Empire. Now, it's written in apocalyptic language. It's written this way in the signs and visions that John has, because the Christians are already being persecuted by Rome. And if they were walking around with a book that clearly and explicitly stated that Christianity and God is going to wipe out the Roman Empire, how much worse do you think things would have been for them? So it's written in these signs and these symbols, and a lot of times the signs and the symbols relate to things that are in the Old Testament, because the Christians would get the picture, they would get the message, they would understand what's being spoken of and what's being talked about. But the Romans, if they were to pick this up and read it, they would be like we are. They'd read this and say, "What in the world is going on here?" Right? And so the book is really broken down into two sections. In the first section, you got from chapter 4 through chapter 11. Here's what's going to happen on earth. And you've got the opening of the seals and the horsemen going out, and basically the word of God is going to go out. And because the word of God is going to go out, because the Christians are going to be evangelistic in their approach, that they're going to face persecution. The persecution is going to come swiftly behind that. And the Romans are going to persecute them. And because of the persecution that takes place, there's going to be punishment meted out upon the Roman Empire at some point. And you've got the trumpets that are sounded. And in those trumpets, there are warnings to the Roman Empire. The first four trumpets deal with natural calamities. There's a calamity on the sea. There's a calamity on the land. There's a calamity on the drinking water. There's a calamity in the heavens. And that's how they divided the world into four parts. Was you had the sea, the land, the fresh water, and the cosmos, if you will, right? The atmosphere, the outside, the space. And so you're going to have calamities on all of those. And then there's this picture of these locusts coming up, and they're hideous looking. They've got this long, stringy hair, and they're representative of sin. And sin is ugly to God. Sin sometimes doesn't look ugly to us, but sin is ugly to God. And so you've got moral decay that was taking place within the Roman Empire. And then the sixth trumpet, there's invading armies from outside. And when you read histories, you see that there are three things that brought down the Roman Empire. Most historians agree that the three things that brought down the Roman Empire were natural calamities, inner moral decay, and foreign invasion. And so you've got all of that taking place. You have all of that being predicted here in the book of Revelation, that this is what's going to befall the Roman Empire. Now, as these things are happening on earth, you've got the second part of the book is not talking about things that are going to happen after that. It's a description of the same thing, but now it's looking behind the curtain. It's a peek behind the curtain at the spiritual battle that is taking place while this physical battle on earth is going on. Here's what's going on behind the scenes. And so we kind of get a peek behind the curtain, and we saw that last week, or the last couple of weeks, as we looked at chapter 12, that we get this peek behind the curtain of the spiritual battle that's taking place, where You got Satan, who's trying to stop God at every turn. He's trying to stop God at every place that he can. Tried to stop God in the Garden of Eden. Tried to stop God with not having the seed line come through David. That at one point they were down to a 6-week-old baby because Athaliah had killed off all of her grandchildren so that she could be queen. But there was one, Joash, who was saved. And so that lineage was almost wiped out. He's there, he's waiting for the woman to give birth, right? He's waiting for God's people. He's waiting for Judaism to give birth to Christianity so that he could devour the child there in chapter 12, as soon as he's born. And did somebody try to kill Jesus as soon as he was born? Or shortly after he was born? But see, Satan's really the one who's behind that. And we get that picture in Revelation chapter 12. We get that it's not just Herod, but Satan is the one who's working behind all of this, that's causing these things to happen. And so he's not able to do that. He's not able to defeat him. So that he makes war in heaven, it says in Revelation 12:7. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against Satan and his angels, and Satan lost, and he was thrown out of heaven. There was no place found for him there anymore. And so he was cast down to earth. And so there's a limit to his power because he maybe tried to follow Jesus up into heaven and continue the battle up there. But he wasn't successful in that. And so he's been cast down to earth, and he's angry because he's been cast down to earth. He's angry because he knows that he has a short time. And he's gone off to make war with the remnant of the woman's seed, with the rest of those who keep the testimony of Jesus Christ. Notice in verse 17, the dragon was enraged with the woman. The woman represents God's people. In the Old Testament, that's Judaism. In the New Testament, that's the Christians. So the dragon was enraged with the woman. He went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Well, who is that has the testimony of Jesus Christ? Christians, right? So he's gone off to make war with the rest of us. Now, he's going to try to wipe out the church as a whole. And what you have in chapter 12 is really kind of a summary of here's the spiritual battle that's been taking place. And here's all the things that go on. And when we get into chapters 13 and following, we're going to get a little bit of detail about part of that war that Satan has with God, in that he's going to try to use the Roman Empire to wipe out Christianity as a whole. He's going to try to use the Roman Empire to go after the whole church. Is he going to be successful in that? No, just like everything else he tries, right? He's not going to be successful in that. But we're going to see the spiritual battle that's taken place here between the Christians and the Romans as we come into chapter 13, especially chapters 13 through 19. We're going to see that Satan's going to call upon 3 allies. And the 3 allies are going to come up to help Satan try to defeat the church. And then those 3 allies are going to go down. And so we'll see that from chapters 13 through chapter 19, that he calls up 3 allies, and his 3 allies are going to be defeated. And that's going to leave him when we get to chapter 20. And we'll talk about that more when we get to chapter 20, and I don't know, maybe another 6 or 7 months from now, at the rate we're going. Hopefully it won't be that long. Any comments or questions on any of these things? I know it's a complicated book, and I know sometimes it's a scary book, and sometimes people don't want to make a comment or ask a question because they're afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it. They were expected to read these things and be able to understand it. It was something that was understandable to them that they were expected to get, and it's the same for us. And I know people have a lot of different theories and opinions, but I'm going to show you what the scriptures say, and I'm going to show you the Old Testament symbols so that you know it's not just me grasping at things, that these are actually places in the Old Testament that deal with the same things or use the same type of symbolism. In chapter 13, then, in verse 1, it says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?'" And so John sees this beast that comes up out of the sea. Now, some folks, when they talk about this sea beast, or he's commonly referred to as the beast in the book of Revelation, because there's a second beast that's going to come up, and he's commonly referred to as the false prophet. But this beast that is seen, a lot of times people want to say, well, this is Satan. But who gives the beast his power? Who does it say there he gives the beast his power? The dragon, right? The dragon gives the beast his power. Who is the dragon? The dragon is Satan, right? He was identified back in chapter 12. In verse 9, it says, the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan. So if Satan is the dragon who gives power to the beast, then the beast can't be Satan. Right? It's got to be somebody else. It's got to be somebody different. It's got to be an ally of his that he has given power and authority to. Now, Satan has some power and authority in this world, right? He's called the ruler of this world. Who made him the ruler of this world? People did, right? Because people chose to follow after him. People made him the ruler of this world. God allows it to be. God allows us to have free will and to make those choices. But we as people, right, we have made him the ruler of this world. And so he comes up, he has 7 heads, and he has 10 horns. He comes up from the sea. Now, there are some folks that, as far as premillennialism goes, there are some folks who believe that this beast is the Antichrist, that some point that the Antichrist is going to come from the political sea, right? And that this is going to be some sort of political leader in their minds that's going to arise. Part of that is right. It does look like it's a political leader, that it does come out of the political sea, if you will. It comes out of the sea of humanity. It comes from people here, that he is a man who comes about, or a group of men who come about. But the idea of this Antichrist that is going to come is not found anywhere in Scripture. The word Antichrist is only used 4 times. It's used in the writings of John and his letters. And if you read those places where it uses the term Antichrist, it says that the Antichrist was already in the world in John's day. So he's not some individual who's going to come at the end of time, who's going to start all of these things and all of have all of this be literal, if you will, in our future. This is in reference to a political leader or political leadership in the past, that John sees this beast coming up out of the sea, coming from the sea of humanity. Come over to Revelation chapter 17 for just a moment. You've got Revelation 7. Then one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying, come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. And if you skip down to verse 15 there, it says, he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And so within this section here, when we're talking about he's come up from the waters, what are the waters? Was people and tongues and nations. It's people, right? So he's come up from among the people. So this beast has come up from the sea. He's come up from the people. So we see that there's political rulership here, if you will. And notice he has 7 heads and 10 horns. And he's got crowns upon those horns. The crowns that are mentioned there are 2 different types of crowns that are mentioned in Scripture. One is the Stephanos crown. That's the victor's crown. That's the crown that we're promised, that if we're victorious, we get the victor's crown. This crown here that is mentioned are diadems. And a diadem would signify that you are royalty, or that you are a leader. Wouldn't signify victory in that case, but it would signify that you are a leader. Or a ruler, by having a diadem. And so this beast has a very earthly connection, right? That he's risen up from, he's going to come up from the people. He's going to be of the people. 10 horns and 7 heads. The dragon, if you remember back in chapter 12, the dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns also. And so the beast looks a lot like who it is that he's following. People sometimes say that, a child, that he's a chip off the old block. because he acts like he acts like his father, or she acts like her mother, right? And that they're a chip off the old block. They have the character of their parents. Back in Hebrews chapter 1, we're told that Jesus Christ is the express image of God, that he has the character of God. Well, here's this sea beast that's coming up, who also has 7 heads and 10 horns, just like the dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns. Why? Because he's got the character of his father, if you will. He's got the character of the one that he's following. Does that make sense? And so you see that correlation, that they are in league with one another, like father, like son. The beast is more descriptive than what we've seen in other things so far. It says, the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. And so the beast has this description of being this way, as far as like a composite of different animals, almost sort of like a Frankenstein type creature, where you take the paws of a bear, and you take the body of a leopard, and you take the head of a lion, and you stuff all that together, right? Or stick all of that together, sort of like Frankenstein did in making a monster out of different bodies. But what is it that he's talking about here when he's talking about a leopard, a lion, and well, back in the book of Daniel, remember the book of Daniel? Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he saw this great big statue. It had a head of gold, it had a chest of silver, it had bronze, and then it had iron mixed with clay, right? And it had four different materials there. And he saw in his dream that there was a rock that was cut without hands that struck this statue, and it destroyed it, right? And to turn it into chaff, and it blew away. And the rock that struck it grew into a mountain that filled the whole earth. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't know what this dream is about, and his wise men can't tell him. He wants his wise men to tell him the dream and the interpretation. And they say, well, we can't tell you what the dream was. You tell us the dream and we'll give you the interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, this isn't his first rodeo with these guys. If I tell you what the dream is, you're going to make something up, He says, no, unless you can tell me what the dream is. And so Daniel, because God reveals it to him, Daniel's able to tell him what's going on in his dream. What did that statue represent in Nebuchadnezzar's dream? Different empires that were going to come. How do we know that? Well, because Daniel says it in Daniel chapter 2. If you read Daniel chapter 2, you'll find all of these things. But in Daniel chapter 2, he says, these are kingdoms that are going to come. You, Nebuchadnezzar, you, Babylon, you are that head of gold. So we don't have to worry about, okay, these are 4 kingdoms that are going to come. When does this begin? At what point in history are we talking about? Are we talking about, the United States and China and the Soviet Union? Are we talking about, Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and the Middle East? What kingdoms, what are we talking about here? He says, no, you, Nebuchadnezzar, are this head of gold. So it starts here with Nebuchadnezzar as the head of gold. And he says, after you is going to come another kingdom that's not going to be as good, right? Because silver isn't as precious as gold. Another kingdom is going to come that isn't going to be as good. Well, what was the kingdom that followed the Persians? I just gave you the answer. The Persians were the empire that followed Babylon, right? And so after Babylon, the Persians are going to come along, and they're going to have an empire. They're going to sweep up what belonged to Babylon, and they're going to take over that. And at some point, the Medes and the Medes are going to fall off, and the Persian Empire is going to be defeated by who? Who's that third kingdom? Not yet. Before the Romans. The Greeks. Right? So the Greeks are going to come along, and they're going to defeat the Persians, and they're going to take up what they had. And then the Greeks are going to be defeated, or they're going to go down, because Alexander, when he dies, his kingdom gets divided up. The kingdom gets divided up into 4 parts. One of those 4 parts ends up growing into the Roman Empire. That's the 4th kingdom. And in the days of these kings, Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, in the days of these kings, Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. That's the rock. That's Christianity. That's the church. That's the kingdom that God's going to establish that's never going to be destroyed, and it's going to fill up the whole earth. It's going to go everywhere in the world. Not just going to be limited to what the Romans conquered. It's going to go everywhere, right? In the days of these kings. And so we see that in Daniel chapter 2. But then come over to Daniel chapter 7, because Daniel also has a vision about the same thing, about the same subject matter, if you will. Notice with me in Daniel chapter 7, beginning here in verse 1, it says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my visions by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea." All right, four winds, right? Number four, if you remember, it represents mankind. It's the earth that we live in, right? You got north, south, east, and west. You got the four winds. You got the four corners of the earth. And so what is he talking about? Well, he's talking about something that's going to come from earth, right? The four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Again, you got that idea of the sea being here, right? And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. And so Daniel has a vision here where he sees these beasts coming up from the sea. Well, what is this? This is again political, talking about kingdoms that are going to come and kings that are going to come. Daniel, so he saw the stirring up the great sea. Four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said to it, Rise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So Daniel, in this vision, he sees these beasts coming up from the sea, sort of like Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He sees these 4 kingdoms that are going to come. The first is a lion, right? And stands up, and his wings are plucked off, and he's given a man's heart. And if you think back to Daniel chapter 4, where Nebuchadnezzar was humbled, right? And that he's out in the field and he's eating grass like a beast, might sort of symbolize that, if you will. But that first kingdom of Babylon here is represented as a lion. The beast in Revelation has a lion's head. He sees a bear. The second beast here is a bear that he sees, and it's raised up on one side. The Babylonians, when they were in power, they used the Medes sort of as their henchmen. Now, what do henchmen do? I don't know. They go around and hench, I guess. But they had the Medes as their henchmen. And then the Medes became the henchmen of the Persians. And so you had the Medes and the Persians that overthrew the Babylonians. And so you have this bear. It's got 2 parts. It's raised up on one side. Why? Because the Persians were stronger than the Medes, and eventually the Persians were the ones that took over, and then you have the Persian Empire. But there's the bear. And in Revelation, the beast that comes up out of the sea has paws like a bear. And then he saw this third creature that was a leopard. It had 4 wings on its back, which means that it was swift. And that was the thing with the Greeks under Alexander the Great. They conquered so quickly. They conquered so swiftly. And this particular beast has 4 heads. Well, what happens when Alexander dies? What happens to his kingdom after his death? Split it up into 4 parts. So it's got 4 heads there. And then you've got this fourth beast that's dreadful and terrible, and it's worse than the others, right? It's more terrifying than the others. And that fourth beast, whether you're reading in Daniel chapter 2 or whether you're reading in Daniel chapter 7, that's the one that gets the most amount of attention. Well, why? Why is it that God isn't really concerned about the Babylonian Empire so much? Why isn't he concerned about the Persian Empire or the Greek Empire? If you look at history, they were major empires. They were major players on the world stage as far as our civilization today. But the Bible spends very little time talking about them, but he spends a lot of time talking about that fourth kingdom, because there's something significant that's going to happen in the time of that fourth kingdom. But you got a beast here that has these different composite parts to it. Notice, if you add up the heads, you've got the lion, you've got the bear, you got 4 heads on the, and then you got the last beast. How many heads is that? 7. There's 7 total heads. And notice in verse 8, it had 10 horns. That last beast has 10 horns. And you come over to Revelation, you've got a beast that's coming up out of the sea that has 7 heads and 10 horns. Well, what is this? What is this beast? It's got a piece of Persia in it. It's got a piece of Babylon in it. It's got a piece of Greek in it. Because when the Medes and the Persians came along, they borrowed from Babylon what they thought was good, and they had that. And the Greeks did the same thing. They borrowed from the Persians and from the Babylonians, and the Romans were great copyists. They copied all of these things from the Babylonians and the Persians. So it's a composite of those other empires. Those other empires were left to other people, but the kingdom of God isn't going to be left to other people because it's never going to be defeated. It's never going to be overthrown. It's going to stand forever. And so while it may be confusing to us to see this written here in Revelation chapter 13 about this beast, book of Revelation doesn't talk about the other three, right? It only talks about the fourth one. That's a composite of the others. Revelation doesn't discuss the first three beasts of Daniel 7 because they're long gone. And Rome is the beast that they have to deal with now. That idea of 10 horns, right, means that they've got power. They've got power to rule. Now, the ten crowns that are there, they could represent client kings of the Romans, perhaps. But the idea of 10 is a number that's complete, that this beast exercises complete political power, if you will, on earth. And he has great strength. And he has blasphemous names on his head, right? Blasphemous names, because they're going to blaspheme against God. To blaspheme means to speak against. And beginning with Nero, Nero's going to want folks to worship him. Now, it doesn't continue beyond Nero for the next couple of emperors after that. Vespasian doesn't demand worship, and his son Titus doesn't demand worship. But typically, they would worship the emperors mostly after they were dead, but Nero wanted to be worshipped. And Domitian, when Domitian comes along, he's going to demand that he be worshipped. And so here's this beast that's coming forth that represents political power. Rome is the one who had great political power at this particular time to make the lives of the Christians difficult. While we're here in Daniel chapter 7, I thought there were a couple of other verses that I wanted us to look at. And bear with me a second. Look over at chapter 7, verses 24 and 25. We'll deal with this more maybe when we get into chapter 17 for sure. But in Daniel chapter 7, verses 24 and 25, it starts talking about the horns that are here on this particular beast, because again, he spends a lot of time on this fourth beast. He says, well, back up to verse 23, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth. So this isn't me saying that these beasts are representative of kingdoms and kings. Right? That's the word of God that says that's what this is. The fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from the other kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High. He shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So Daniel's pointing at the fact that in this kingdom there are going to be a total of 10 kings. And it's the 11th one. It's the 11th one who comes along that you really need to be concerned about. He's the one that you really need to be worried about, because he's the one that's going to persecute the Christians. He's going to persecute the saints of God Most High. Right? He's going to say blasphemous things. As we go through and we look at this particular beast that is in Revelation, this sea beast that comes up, we're going to see the same sort of description given to him. Now, in Revelation, it mentions that there are 7 and that this one that you have to be worried about is the 8th. So what's the deal there? Is it that there are 7 and then you got to worry about the 8th guy, or that there are 10 and then you got to worry about the 11th guy? Well, here's the thing. When you look at the emperors of Rome, after Nero dies, you've got a year where that you've got 3 different emperors, and they were considered to be illegitimate because each of them seized power for a couple months at a time, and then they were overthrown. And so those 3 typically aren't counted. And so if you take the 10 and you discount 3 of them, and it's going to talk about 3 of them, 3 of the 10 horns were plucked up by the roots. Well, 3 of them didn't count. And so it's the 8th guy and the 11th guy are the same guy. It's in reference to Domitian because you've got Augustus, you got Tiberius, you have Caligula, you have Claudius, you have Nero, Vespasian, Titus, and then Domitian is the 8th one. And that's the guy that he's warning them about. That's the guy that you got to be concerned about. That's the guy that you have to be worried about. He's the one who's going to subdue 3 kings, right? Going to pluck up the roots of those 3 because they're not legitimate rulers. And so he's the one that's going to persecute the saints, and he's the one that you need to be worried about. And so even the prophecy that's given here in Daniel chapter 7 is in reference to Domitian being the one that you got to be worried about. And when we get over here to Revelation chapter 13, those Christians who would have known what is back in Daniel chapter 7 would recognize that what's going on here is that this is the Roman Empire, that it's a part of Babylon and a piece of Persia and a piece of Greece. It's the one that succeeded those other 3 kingdoms. And he's the one that's got power and authority now, and he's trampling on people, and he's the one that you need to be watching out for. Does that make sense? Comments or questions on these things? It takes some time to dig into these things, but it's not unknowable. It's not, you just make it be whatever it is that you want it to be, right? Which is what a lot of people in the world do with this, is they just make it into what they want it to be. It says in verse 3, I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him? This idea that one of his heads has a mortal wound and it looks like it's been healed, maybe it's sort of a parallel that you've got the lamb that was slain but is still alive, we see in the book of Revelation. And so on this beast, you've got a head that looks like it's been wounded, but now it's back and now it's fine. When Domitian comes along as emperor, there's a group of people that believe that Nero has been reincarnated, because Nero was a nut, right? As far as what it is that he wanted, how it is that he wanted to be treated, how he wanted to be addressed. Nero was basically seen as being crazy. When Domitian comes along, he's kind of like Nero on steroids. And so when he comes along, they're like, man, Nero is back. It's like Nero's been reincarnated. And there was a cult, there was a group of people. Some of the church fathers, like Irenaeus, they wrote about these things, that there was a cult of people who believed that Nero had been reincarnated and that Domitian was Nero back. And so the idea that he's got this mortal wound and yet he's still here would go along with that idea of, again, it being Domitian that's being spoken of here. We're in Revelation chapter 13, by the way. That he's the one that's being spoken of here, that has a head that looks like it's wounded, and so the world's amazed by that. And so they follow after the beast. And they worship the dragon. Are there people today that worship the dragon? There are people today that worship Satan. There are people that worship him openly, right? That you got, I can't remember the guy's name. He wrote the Black Bible or whatever it was out there. But you have folks that are actively worshiping Satan. So that is actually a thing that's out there. But if we're not in God's camp, whose camp are we in? Aren't we in his camp? If we're not in God's camp, aren't we in Satan's camp? And while we may not be consciously, purposefully worshiping him, if we're in his camp, we're following him, aren't we? And we're doing what it is that he wants.
It's definitely one of those things that if you're not living, you're against it, even if you don't mean to be.
Yeah. There's an effort that's required, right? There's to be a Christian and to be following after Jesus. It's got to be an active thing, right? And if we're inactive, or if we think that we're sitting on the sidelines, or we think that we're sitting on the fence, we're really on Satan's side in those cases, and doing what it is that he wants, doing his bidding, if you will. And so they worshipped the dragon. It says they worshipped the beast. They said, who is like the beast? Who's able to make war with him? Well, think back to the days of the Roman Empire. If you're just a small band of Christians, what hope are you going to have in trying to go to war and fight against the Roman Empire? Right? They've conquered the whole world. They've defeated everybody. You're going to have a very hard time in that day, right? Who is like the beast? Who's able to overcome him? Who's able to make war with him? Again, is descriptive of the Roman Empire. It says he was given a mouth. speaking great things and blasphemies. He was given authority to continue for 42 months. We saw there back in Daniel chapter 7 that the one who's going to persecute the saints, he's given time to do this, right? And the time there in Daniel chapter 7 that we noticed in verse 25 was that he's going to be able to do it for a time, times, and half a time, right? Time singular, times plural, and half a time. What is that? That's 3.5. And you see 3.5 mentioned here in the book of Revelation. It's a short time period. It's an incomplete time period. It's a time period that it's not a whole number, right? He's not going to be able to be victorious in wiping out the whole church in a 3.5. Here it says that he's given authority to continue for 42 months. Well, how long is 42 months if we break that into years? It's 3.5, right? 3 years is 36 months. Another 6 months is 42. It's 3.5 years. He's given authority. So he's given authority. Now, it's not literal. It's not that he's going to have authority for 3.5 years. It's not that the persecution of the Christians is going to last for 3.5 years. The numbers are meant to be symbolic. That it's a small time period, right? He's going to be able to persecute for 3.5. Just wait, because when you get to chapter 20, when you get to the glory that exists, if you stick with Christ and if you stick with Christianity and if you're faithful unto death, that's 1,000 years, right? 1,000 years compared to 3.5, right? Don't lose your soul in this 3.5 persecution that's going to take place, because the 1,000 is out there, right? The longer time period is out there. And for us, right, that 3.5 might be 60, 70, 80 years, however long we have. Don't lose your soul in the 80 years, and you're going to suffer for eternity, right? You want the joy of eternity. So deal with what you have to deal with in the 60, 70, or 80 years. I lost my place in my notes. So he opens his mouth, it says, and he spoke great blasphemy against God. And we'll see that he's going to set himself up. Domitian demanded that he be referred to in Latin as Dominus et Deus. Dominus et Deus, which basically means Lord and God. That was how you had to refer to him. When you spoke to him, when you spoke about him, you had to refer to him as being Lord and God. And if you didn't do that, you were going to be in trouble. If you didn't burn a little bit of incense, you were going to be in trouble. And the Christians aren't going to do that. And people might say, well, what's the big deal? Just burn a little incense you don't have to mean it. Just burn a little incense to the emperor so you can live. Christians who were Christians weren't going to do that. They weren't going to declare somebody else to be Lord when Jesus Christ is Lord. They weren't going to burn incense and worship the emperor. And so they were going to be in trouble because they're not willing to do that. They're not willing to add another God onto their pagan practices, if you will, because they believed that there was one God. And they were only going to serve that one God. And so there's going to be problems here with Domitian. And so Domitian really is the one who ramps up the persecution against Christians. Now, he's not the only one that's going to persecute them. There's going to be persecution that's going to come from emperors after him. But he's the one who really ramps things up, and he's the one that they're being warned about here in the book of Revelation. It's talking about the one who's the eighth one that's going to come. He's going to come from the seven, and he's going to be the one that they need to be concerned about. And so you've got the civil persecuting power of the Roman Empire represented here in the sea beast. In his ecclesiastical history, Eusebius wrote that Domitian established himself as the successor of Nero in his hatred and hostility towards God, in that he's persecuting God's people. And so you've got someone who's writing ancient Roman history who says, man, this guy really hated Christians. He was second only maybe to Nero, or Nero was only second to him perhaps, that he established himself as being the successor because, like I said, Vespasian and Titus really didn't go after the Christians, but Domitian does. So it says it was granted with him. Well, it says in verse 6, he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. So he's blaspheming against God. He's blaspheming against God's throne, right? Because he's taken God's title to say that he's going to call himself, or that people have to call him Lord and God. What is he doing? Well, he's usurping God's authority. He's usurping God's position. He's usurping God's throne, if you will, in doing this. He opened his mouth to blaspheme, to speak against God, to speak against his name, against his tabernacle or his dwelling place, which is in heaven. That which is in heaven, there at the end of verse 6. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, John says, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So John says, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have this beast that comes up out of the sea. John sees this beast coming up. It's the civil authority of Rome, and they're going to persecute the Christians for a while. Persecution is going to go on for this representational 42 months or 3.5 or however long that's going to be, that they're going to have to suffer this persecution. And he's given authority to do this. It says it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. He's given authority over every tribe and tongue and nation. In language, he's going to be a ruler, a worldwide ruler. Well, who fits this picture of somebody who's a worldwide ruler who has authority given to him for this in this particular time period? It's Rome, right? It's Rome who's given this authority. God gives authority to governments. Jesus said that when he appeared before Pontius Pilate, that you have authority, but the authority that you had has been given to you from God. God gives authority to the rulers of this world. And so they're given authority by God to be able to do this. And you might wonder, you might scratch your head, you might say, well, why has God given them authority? And by them having authority, they're going to go out and they're going to persecute God's people. Why would God allow something like that to happen? Because God has given us free will. He's given us the ability to make a choice of whether we want to be good, whether we want to be evil, whether we want to follow him, whether we want to do our own thing. He's given us free will. And free will is a great thing because he didn't make us as robots, right? He didn't program us so that we have to follow him, so that we're forced to follow him, that he's going to take us kicking and screaming into heaven with him someday. He's given us the choice. And really, that's the best world to live in when you think about it, that you've got the choice that you can make whether you want to follow him or whether you don't want to follow him. He's not going to force you to be able to do that. But because people can make the choice to follow him or to not follow him, there are going to be consequences. God allows those consequences to take place. It's a test for us to see if we're going to be faithful in the face of persecution, but it's also a test for others to see, okay, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle this when you get this authority and you get this power and you have this ability to make a choice? The Roman emperors are going to make the wrong choice, and at some point, they're going to pay for that. At some point, God's going to punish them for that. At some point, they're going to suffer because of the choices that they make. Notice, it was granted with him in verse 7 to make war with the saints and to overcome them. He's given this authority. All who dwell on earth will worship him whose names have not been written in the book of life. You want your name to be in the book of life. We noticed the book of life earlier. The book of life is something where the names of those that are going to be saved, they are in the book of life. Right? And we want our name to be there. And if our name is there, then we're not going to be worshiping the beast. We're not going to be worshiping the emperor. Because if we're worshiping the emperor, our name's not going to be in the book of life. But those who are in the book of life, even though he says here in verse 9, here's what you need to understand. If anyone has an ear, let him hear, right? That we see that earlier in the book of Revelation in the letters to the 7 churches. He who has an ear, hear what the Spirit says to the churches. This is important stuff, and it's important for us to understand it. And so he's saying, you need to understand this. You may be led into captivity. Right? You may be led as a captive into captivity. You may be oppressed. You may be persecuted by the Roman Empire. But he who kills with the sword, what the Romans are doing to you in persecuting you and killing some of you, he who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Because you know that even though the Roman Empire may take your physical life from you, they can't take your spiritual life from you. And at some point, their spiritual life is a mess, and God's going to punish them for what it is that they've done to his people. And so, again, the message is, you got this beast that's coming up. And he's a terrible beast, and he's got power and authority, and he's going to be able to trample on the saints for a while. But you stick with it, because we're going to be victorious in the end. Comments or questions or snide remarks before we break? Yes, Morgan.
So, word saints, and I'm sure you know that the Catholic Church has a process of canonization that declare a person a saint. So for us, not being Catholic, what is that talk?
Saints, that word saint there, it means holy one. It means those that are following after God. The saints were those that were in the church. And you see that in most of Paul's letters. When Paul writes to the church in Philippi, he writes to the saints in Philippi. And in Corinthians, he writes to the saints that are in Corinth, right? To the saints that are in Galatia, to the saints that are, he's writing these letters to the saints. Well, he's not writing letters to people that have been dead for 5 years, that have been canonized and gone through some sort of process and have performed 2 miracles after their death. He's not writing to people that are dead, because there'd be no point in writing a letter to people who are dead. He's writing to people who are alive. And so saints, the way that it's used biblically, is talking about those who are Christians.
So it's like a collective of brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Yeah. We're God's holy ones, right? Because be holy, for I am holy, he says in Romans. All right. Thank you for your attention and comments.